Imagine this. You finally decide to cut back your clinical hours. You're dreaming of those slower mornings, being able to get your kids on and off the bus, extra time with family, maybe even a long lost hobby making its way back into your life. You want to have more time and more energy, and you want a schedule that actually feels sustainable for the first time in years. It sounds great, right? But then the financial doubts start creeping in. Can I really afford this? What if my income drops too much? How will this impact our family's long term financial stability? That's the reality check many clinicians face when they start considering a part time pivot. And here's the hard truth: going part time without a financial plan can feel even more stressful than continuing to work full time and collecting your paycheck every 2 weeks. But the good news, with the right preparation, you can structure your finances so this transition is not only doable, but also feels sustainable. That's exactly what we're diving into today. 5 key financial boxes you need to check before going part time. And stick around until the end because I'll be sharing a free guide to help you run those numbers for yourself, plus details on my group coaching program, Pathway to Part Time, where I walk you through this process step by step. Let's talk about one of the biggest missteps that I see clinicians make when they shift to part time. They only focus on salary in terms of compensation and what's going to change when they pivot to part time. They assume their financial health is purely dependent on what hits their checking account every 2 weeks in that biweekly direct deposit. But here's what often happens: they reduce their hours and they have this expectation that they know they're going to have to reduce their lifestyle, but they didn't fully calculate the impact of things like adjusted benefits, employer contributions to retirement accounts, or tax changes. They go part time thinking they'll have more flexibility, those slow mornings, that better schedule, but they didn't assess how their budget would shift based on their change in compensation. And they suddenly feel this heavy financial pressure to pick up extra shifts and to do it in this way that feels panicked and not in a way that feels strategic or intentional. They assume that their smaller paycheck means that they're going to have to tighten everything financially and live this rice and beans lifestyle and really scrimp and save, when in reality, they need to optimize their financial strategy and also negotiate really well so that shift to part time has as small of an impact on income as possible. Going part time is definitely, at least in part, a numbers game, but it's a game that you can win with the right approach. So let's go through 5 financial boxes that need to be checked before making this step from full time practice to part time practice of clinical medicine. Number one, your debt status. What do you owe, and how will this change if you shift your income or go to part time? Debt, especially people who have gone to graduate school and pursued higher level degrees, student loan debt, is often the biggest financial burden that people carry. And going part time requires a real, honest look at your current debts. You want to get everything out. I know that this is scary. You want to get everything out and ask yourself, how much debt do I currently have? What are the balances on everything that we owe, even if it's zero interest across the board? What are the minimum monthly payments that we have to continue to make? What's my interest rate? Am I carrying high interest rate debt with interest rates 6, 7, 8, 10, 17%? If I go part time, will I still be able to meet my monthly debt obligations? Think about this deeply. It's not just about being able to make your monthly payments, but also think about being able to make progress towards paying down or paying off debt. If you've been making incredible strides at paying off your student loans or credit card debt, how will making a pivot to part time affect your rate of your debt payoff plan? If you're aggressively paying off debt, ask yourself if you need to slow down those extra payments for a bit while transitioning to part time as you make this adjustment. You can temporarily shift minimum payments or even temporarily slow down some of that extra principal that you're paying on your debt to do some things like free up cash flow, then ramp back up when you're financially settled. Do some calculations. There's some great online student loan payoff calculators, debt payoff calculators to see what this will do in terms of a payoff timeline. Don't let these numbers scare you, but also don't don't let them scare you, but also don't think about making a shift without looking at these details. That is how people get into trouble when they go part-time and then they think, oh no, I didn't think about how it would impact X, Y, or Z. It's irresponsible, like a little kid playing hide and seek and just sort of covering their eyes and pretending that they can't see, you can't see me if I can't see you. It is your responsibility to know the downstream influence on debts if your income adjusts due to part-time work. I don't want that to be the thing that stands in your way, but you cannot ignore your student loan debt. You cannot ignore your car payment. You cannot act like those things don't exist. Make this shift and then just hope that everything works out. One negotiation insight that I want to share relative to debt is that if your employer offers loan repayment assistance, you want to see if that is applicable to part-time workers as well. So, as with all things, don't simply assume that you're going to lose the benefits because you're going part-time. Ask HR about those things. Ask them what the threshold is to continue to qualify. Because if it's 32 hours a week, maybe it's worthwhile shifting to 32 hours a week until you get to the finish line in terms of repayment assistance or loan forgiveness. Find out what that threshold is so that you can maintain as many benefits as possible during this time. The second thing to consider when making this pivot to part-time from a financial standpoint is your emergency fund. Are you in a position where you can handle unexpected costs? Going part-time is one of these things like having a baby or moving to a new city that means fluctuations in income, benefits, and an adjustment in your cash flow. That being said, you want to be as prepared as possible for things like financial surprises. Ultimately, even with incredible strategic negotiation, going part-time often includes a dip in your income, especially at first. Be prepared to cover for that decrease with a fully funded emergency fund. Traditionally, you'll hear subject matter financial experts call for somewhere between 3 to 6 months of expenses as a baseline advice for how much money to have in a fully funded emergency fund. Now, you know your financial situation best, but if you're considering going part-time and you're concerned and you get a little anxious and a little tightness in your chest thinking about having enough money when you go through this transition, consider beefing up this emergency fund to 6 months, maybe even 9 months, if that would make you feel much more secure as you're getting ready to make this pivot. Maybe set aside that extra 3 months of expenses as a part-time transition fund just for some extra padding and margin in your financial world. It's important to build that cushion before you make the leap because you'll find you have less margin in your budget when you go to that part-time income. Now, I want to make something very clear here. I am not saying fund your emergency fund so you can live out of that fund when you're working part-time. You need to be able to cover your monthly minimums and your living costs on your part-time income. I am absolutely okay if some of that discretionary spending decreases, if even the rate of you paying off your student loans goes down slightly. But if you cannot cover your minimums, if you cannot cover your monthly quality of life, you are not ready to make this transition. Do not go part-time until you have a plan to cover those basic needs monthly and your minimum payments monthly. 3, you want to take a look at your monthly budget and your cash flow. Does your income, your new income in this part-time position, support your lifestyle? This is where people get really tripped up. They don't adjust their variable monthly spending before going part-time. It is absolutely okay to have nice things and to spend money on things that you value. But do take a look at your variable and fixed expenses on a monthly basis. Take a look at what absolutely needs to be paid and what are some things that you could let go of. Maybe even practice living on that part-time income and bank the extra to fund that extra emergency fund in the months leading up to making this transition. When I was getting ready to quit my job, I was prepping to go. So when I was getting ready to quit my job, we did this. And then when I was getting ready to go from full-time clinical practice to part-time clinical practice and that adjustment in benefits, I ran a mock budget. We went in our budgeting software. I made a new month. I pretended like I was earning what I was going to be earning after this transition. And we looked at our cash flow, what would be monthly like in our budget. And We also, when I quit my job, we ran like 6 months of a budget with no income for me. And it was going to be tight, but it was going to be doable in terms of what that would actually look like. So we did the same thing again when it was full-time to part-time transition, and just try it and live for 3 to 6 months on that new part-time compensation. Take your best guess on what you'll be bringing home. Use middle of the road. Don't use best case scenario like, oh yeah, they offer to pay me my full-time salary and drop me to 50% of my hours. And don't use worst case scenario like they fire you altogether and your income goes to zero like that. But somewhere in the middle of those two things, set that as your income for the month. And then live on that amount in the income column in your budget for anywhere from 1 to 3 months. You should be able to live on this and save the difference. Consider putting that in your part-time transition fund for 3 months. I'm hesitant to say that you should be able to live quote unquote comfortably because that means something different for everyone. And that depends on what your values are and what you prioritize. But the bottom line here is that if you can live on that part-time income and then see how it feels, see how much wiggle room or lack thereof you have in your budget. That is a key piece of information to have before you make the transition. Yes, if you are really diligent about budgeting, you could look back on the last 3 months and see how much you saved above, but I would even encourage you to do it for a month or two to just see how it feels. Because if it means no date nights, no babysitter, no kids' sports, that's okay, but you want to know that going in terms of what you are and aren't going to be able to do from a lifestyle standpoint, from a cash flow standpoint when you go part time. Take this opportunity to cut out non essential expenses, which we should all do periodically in our budget anyway, before you drop hours so you don't feel the pressure afterwards. All of these tools are designed to make you feel like you're ready before, so that when you switch to part time, it's not a stressful scramble, it's a strategic step. Take the opportunity to look at these things and run your budget and see what your monthly cash flow is going to be like and see how it feels to be bringing in that much. Because when we go part time, we think about the schedule and the lifestyle and the quality of life and those slow mornings. We also need to think about covering cable and feeding our children and filling our tanks with gas. Here's something to think about when you think about this cash flow and monthly budgeting in terms of going to part time. If your goal is financial flexibility, not just survival, I want you to set a minimum comfortable income threshold. I have a friend who calls this her enough point, and structure your part-time compensation accordingly. So this is sort of reverse engineering how much you need to be making in order for this to feel good and be feasible financially for your family. And then figure out the ways that you can adjust your clinical income, maybe add another income stream or two to get you to that enough point so that you can continue to have this great life where you are just thriving, but also where you feel good about what you're bringing in and that you're not sort of scrimping in beans and rice to make it through. The fourth financial box to check as you prepare for this part-time pivot is retirement contributions. Are you still on track? Where are you? And where are you going in terms of if your income adjusts? Retirement savings is one of these things that it's one of the most overlooked financial areas. It's like chronic disease, or even more so than chronic disease, it's like longevity and choices that you make in terms of proactive management of your health on the front end. No, it doesn't affect your ability to go shopping for back to school clothing or go out to dinner next Tuesday, but retirement is vital in terms of your long-term financial planning. Here are a few questions to ask yourself in anticipation of a part-time pivot or really any income adjustment. How are we doing right now? There are some retirement income projections, some retirement calculators online where you can put in your current age, your current balance in retirement, the rate at which you're saving. You can predict some market growth and see how much money you're going to have when you get to that point when you're ready to retire. Will you still get employer matching 401k contributions if you switch to a part-time status? Can you contribute enough on your own to stay on track for retirement? How long do you plan on working part-time for? So if you're looking at this and you think, I'm going to work part-time for another 3 years until our youngest is in kindergarten, and then I'm going to step back into a full-time role, that is much different than I'm going to go part-time and work part-time or not at all for the next 30 years. So think about that in terms of retirement planning. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's not that one is feasible and one isn't, but you need to think about the duration of time in which you anticipate taking this step down in terms of funding retirement and also in terms of part-time income. If you still aim to retire early or on time, do you need to increase your percentage of contributions in order to hit that goal? Do you need to start saving some income outside of retirement in a way that's not as tax sheltered, but continues to give you that opportunity to have funds outside of retirement that you can access early? And last but not least, the fifth financial box to check before pivoting to part time is to think about hidden costs and perks. What benefits will you gain or lose? So, the benefits that you gain are easy to see in terms of getting to the dentist and having a schedule that works for your family. But what benefits will you lose? This is where people will lose money without even realizing it. Also, I do want to highlight here, because I don't want to sound too negative, that the flexibility of prioritizing your time is priceless. I'm sitting here in my scrubs, getting ready to go to the office and see patients for a half day because that's what worked for my schedule this week. That being said, don't forget to ask HR or whoever in your organization is in charge of benefits about knowing how these benefits will be affected by that change. So think about benefits like health insurance coverage. What is your backup plan here? Can your partner provide the coverage? Malpractice insurance. Will they continue to cover your whole malpractice if you're working part-time? CME stipends, licensure fees, paid time off. Unpaid time off is a really good thing to negotiate and ask for as you're making this part-time transition. If you're losing benefits, which oftentimes you are if you'll go below that 32 or 24 hours per week, negotiate for extra compensation to offset those costs. Consider going to a 1099, consider changing the way that you're paid, consider going from straight salary to a base plus bonus or productivity based model. You'll still need to do things like maintain your license, your DEA prescribing, your malpractice insurance. If your work isn't going to cover those costs, calculate your costs on a monthly or annual basis and make sure you can cover those within your compensation package after you make this part-time transition. Okay, so I want you to walk through a little bit of this part-time transition plan. So there is a guide linked in the show notes, 5 steps to a smooth transition to part-time, that will check some of these financial boxes, that will get you thinking about some of these things that are going to be affected by a pivot to part-time practice of medicine. There's also an assessment linked in there inside of that guide to assess your readiness to make a part-time pivot. You want to test out your part-time budget for anywhere from 1 to 3 to 6 months and see how it feels and see how it works for your family before cutting those hours back. I want you to be incredibly intentional and strategic about the way that you negotiate. Your employer does not automatically control your financial future. You do. And going part-time at work does not necessarily mean that you're going to slow down or step out of some of these things. It means that you're going to be intentional about diversifying your income streams, about being more intentional about your time, and also being more intentional about that money piece also. Find support. Do not go through this alone. Sometimes we look around at work and it seems like everyone else is leaning in and going full time and going for leadership positions, and we're like, I want to tap the brakes and I want to slow down and I want to be more at peace and have more time to spend with my family. Finding a group of like-minded clinicians can be life-giving in this process. So as we wrap up, I want to remind you that before going part-time, check these 5 financial boxes to avoid undue stress and help you to feel like you're not scrambling as a part of this transition, and set yourself up for success and sustainability when you make this pivot from full-time clinical practice to part-time. Download that guide to a smooth part-time pivot. It's tracybingham.com/part-time, or it's linked as always in the show notes. You can book a one-on-one call where we create a financial roadmap for your transition to part-time, where we talk about things. Because if you're looking at this and you're like, is this too much debt? Is this, too much of a drop in my income? We can talk through those things and talk about some strategies and also maybe some milestones of when you would be ready. So if you look at this and you think, I am absolutely not ready, but I want to be ready in 2 years, what can we do to get you there? And then I invite you to join us inside of the pathway to part-time. It's a 6-month coaching program where you get in a group of other like-minded clinicians who are also on this path to pivoting to a part-time practice of clinical medicine. You're going to get the exact step-by-step strategy with a checklist where you go through it to make part-time work for you. My goal here is to help you have this life that is wonderful and amazing, and also where work fits into your life, where you are not trying to squeeze your life into the cracks in between work. Part-time work should be this wonderful blessing where when you do it well and you make this transition smoothly, it will give you more time, freedom, and financial stability, not stress and scrambling and feeling like you don't have enough money for the end of the month. With the right plan, you can make that happen, and I would be honored to walk with you along this journey. That is all for today. This PA is out.